the Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, transcripts, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Welcome to the Radical Secular. I'm Joe Pinti.
I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Drew Scott.
The topic of this show gets right to the root of why we do what we do here. We are the Radical Secular, and we represent and advocate for the ongoing human progress that began with the Enlightenment. The effort is to portray people like us as extremists by so many is quite telling. In truth, we are the ones challenging the true extremism of our age, the reactionary forces of religion that seek to return this world back to a far more brutal era for all except the chosen elites of ancient hierarchies that we've talked about so much on this show. Who are we? Our title says it all. The modern term secular comes from the late Latin secularis, meaning worldly or pagan. In the Enlightenment, the term came to represent a basis for society that is rooted in reason and science rather than religion. This spawned an evolutionary change in humanity that is still in progress today. That is our project. And the etymology of the term radical is just as important. It comes from the Latin radix, meaning root. In modern times, radical has been used in the sense of radical reform of the electoral system to widen the franchise, for example. It's also associated with republicanism, civic nationalism, abolition of titles, rationalism, and the resistance to a single established state religion. It's also associated with the redistribution of property, the freedom of the press, and so many other benefits and real important changes that have happened in modernity. And that's us. And so let's face the point of the spear here and take on fundamentalism, shall we?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
But first, again, I want to remind you all to make sure to subscribe and leave a review and tell your friends to listen. And please head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/theradicalsecular. We really appreciate your support, even if it's just buying us a cup of coffee every month. We have support tiers from $3 a month on up. New episodes also post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. Now, let's do the t-shirts.
Well, this week I'm sporting a one-off custom that I did that reads, "Help destroy a family tradition." And I saw it on a poster in, I believe it was Friday the 13th, part 5. And I just saw that text on a poster. It offers no context whatsoever. And I just thought it was bizarre and hilarious. So I put it on a t-shirt because after looking it up, I found out the slogan was connected to some sort of child abuse program, anti-child abuse program,
okay.
Which in that context makes sense. But this text here offers no context whatsoever. So it could apply to really anything, any kind of tradition. And in this case, I thought religion.
Yeah, certainly fits.
Tradition has a lot to answer for. I mean, what it really is saying is we're going to do this because we've always done it that way. And that never makes any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. And speaking of tradition, last week I wore a t-shirt on the issue of climate change. I'm going to do the same thing again. Maybe I'm starting one here, baby. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, there's the Earth.
I think it's always good to look at our Mother Earth. I mean, it's where we live. It's where everybody in history has ever lived. And it's what we're going to need to take care of if we want to continue. So
yeah, absolutely. And
never goes out of style.
No.
Yeah, I don't think we should care about climate change because of any tradition. I think we should care about it because our absolute survival depends on it.
You said it. Absolutely. And, with religion, there is that whole thing about domination of the earth and exploitation that's, that's mandated by God and all that. And that has to be directly challenged. And that's what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
It's been extremely destructive, and that's why I wore it. Like, this is a shirt that I've worn before, but this is, of course, evolution, and then evolving to the final stage where we actually dump religion in the trash, the three Abrahamic religions. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about fundamentalism, but as soon as you bring up fundamentalism, you have to end up talking about religion in general.
And the good thing is, I think that we all have a slightly, maybe more than a little slightly, but a different perspective on this, which is a good thing. You don't want all of us to be parroting each other. So we're going to have a little debate about that here. So before we get to our main topic, let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about the news. And we can start with what we were discussing last week, the issue of Afghanistan. And we really still need to think about what this whole project going into Afghan was really all about and staying there for all these years, these 2 decades. And, we talked about the military-industrial complex and how that really plays into it, that so much wealth was redistributed to corporations and contractors during this war. And also the other thing, ostensibly you came in to fight terrorism, to get rid of Al-Qaeda. How much was our effort here really beneficial for the people of Afghanistan themselves? And that's an honest question. There was some benefits for sure, but how much of the energy it literally went into other things? And of course, now we have to deal with the aftermath, and primarily about evacuating and resettling refugees, right, guys?
Yeah, well, I thought you guys, I missed last week's show, unfortunately, but I thought you guys did a really amazing job at it. And of course, it's a very fluid situation. And today, we had a huge terror attack at the airport, which is, in which at least 12 or maybe even 13 American soldiers have died, and some unknown number of Afghans. And it was just, again, getting out of this thing was never going to be easy. And it was never going to be clean. And, I had a huge emotional reaction to those images that we saw the first day. And because as much as everything you guys said was true, and there are parallels to Vietnam, the issues of the military-industrial complex and all of that, I feel like also, though, I had always held out some sort of hope that even in spite of ourselves, we might end up doing some good there. And seeing, those murals of women painted over, seeing the people in terror, seeing the people clinging to those airplanes and just crowding, being willing to risk their lives just at any remote chance of getting out of there, was just something that made me think so much of how, what is the purpose for America's power in the world, and how we could use it for good, and how, an entire generation of women and people in general have grown up since we've been in Afghanistan under our protection. Yeah. And it's just so hard to see that protection being removed, and now we know that it's just going to revert back to barbarism. And yet, the cost to us was incredibly high of even going in there in the first place. So I don't know. I just had a lot of mixed feelings about it.
Drew, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Sean is right. The reality is that we lost the war. We simply lost it, and we underestimated, the Taliban, and we underestimated their devotion to their fundamentalism, which I think is kind of ties into what you were saying at the top of the show, Joe. It's it's barbarism, and it feeds people's primal vicious instincts to be fed these ideas of, male superiority, and, there's all kinds of stuff about, hating the idolaters and anyone who doesn't believe. And it's horrible. It's horrible. But it's a great big mess. And the attacks this morning, very, very sad. It's horrible to see that kind of stuff. But again, the reality is that we lost the war, and we're seeing the fallout of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The sad thing is that there's been atrocities all along. There's been attacks all along. Americans stopped paying attention. Now they're paying attention again, and there hasn't been an attack. And there's been 12 or 13 American GIs killed, and many, many other Afghanis. And it's very vivid and visceral now, and it's going to play into our politics. It's going to people are not going to remember for 20 years. They're just going to see now, and that's all they're going to use to make a basis of how well Biden is doing, and it's kind of a tragedy.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the other parallels that I see is our underestimation of what we were up against. It's like in the Vietnam, it was the North Vietnamese' dedication to having their country and having their country free of the foreign invaders, as they had freed themselves of the French and other occupiers throughout their history. So in that sense, they are a lot more devoted than a lot of people serving. I'm not questioning this, the dedication of our servicemen, but there's something about that level of fundamentalism and the fact that you're fighting for your own country that I think, and that it's land that and people that and that they can blend in with civilians. It's another parallel to Vietnam. All these things I think give them a home field advantage.
Definitely there's that, but I think also there was some dirty dealings going on. The Afghan army was sold out and they were undermined. And basically the message was the Americans are pulling out. And we didn't so much lose the war as we just decided to pull out. And all that nonsense that happened with Trump and getting that commander freed from the prison that he was in Pakistan, and the deals that were cut in the background really just undermined the willingness to fight for those people who were working for the U.S. And I think also one of the things that really disturbed me about all of this is that we've never succeeded in so-called nation building, but I think that's also because we haven't really tried. Like we make this pretense of going in to help establish democracy or freedom, but we're really there for geopolitical reasons. And so it would take a multi-generational commitment to these people to overcome, Drew, what you're talking about, this sort of home field advantage, where to them they're not sure. They want to pick the winner. They want to be on the side of the winner. And so if they knew that we were there for the duration, and we knew that we were there, it wasn't something that was controversial for us to be there for the duration. And honestly, it shouldn't be America. It should be the United Nations. The world should have some mechanism in place. I know this is Pollyanna pie in the sky stuff, but I think that the world has a strong interest in not allowing failed states because of terrorism and because of human rights. So that's my 2 cents.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, good points.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we could talk about this forever. I have so much more I would like to say, but let's save it and for another show. Maybe we'll continue to follow this issue as it progresses. Let's just turn real quickly to another very difficult issue, which is the pandemic and the Delta spike that we're seeing now. We've just went over 100,000 people hospitalized with COVID in the United States. Again, I think most people didn't expect to see that again, and here we are. And Florida and Texas are leading the way with record numbers, the most ever in those states. And the spike has not peaked in many places yet. The state of Florida is particularly just really frustrating because they're just denying it to the bones. I mean, they're just not even reporting the data anymore in any really significant and sort of systematic way. You go on the Worldometer site and you see that they're reporting 5, 6, 7 people dying a day, which is really more like 200 dying a day, and it's incredible. There's that. There's also the issue that's come up now, big time, is with the boosters, where this is another point of resistance that's happening on the right and with other people, the anti-vaxxers. And of course, now they're all of a sudden they discovered that like big corporations are crooked, like big pharma critiques.
Oh God! Well, that's because Trump said that.
Yeah. And it's just ridiculous, because we all know this. Everybody knows that there's this graft that goes on with big corporations and they're tied into government and stuff. There's nothing new about that. That's the same thing with the military-industrial complex in Afghanistan. There's a pharmaceutical industrial complex. Okay, that's part of corporate America. Okay, not a surprise there. but it's not like that has any bearing at all in the fact that we're in a pandemic and we need treatments, right? We still do, and they're the ones that can provide them for the pharmaceutical companies. So, and in talking about that too, the latest science. Clearly, there is a waning effectiveness with the vaccines, although they're still very effective. With time, they're becoming less effective. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve, be proactive, and not wait until they become significantly ineffective before we distribute the boosters. And that seems reasonable to me. I don't know about you guys, but
I'll be lining up for that booster.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. These shots are not a big deal. People are crazy.
It's just simple logic, because, even if you can make the argument that we don't know the long-term effects of these vaccinations, okay, let's say you make that argument. We also don't know the long-term effects of catching COVID. Don't know those either.
It's disingenuous. The whole thing is
it is.
That is not an argument that we don't know the long-term effects. Okay, that's just not an argument.
No, but I agree. But even if you were to make that argument, okay, you can make an equal argument that we don't know the effects of COVID disease, right, long term. And we do know without a shadow of doubt that COVID has killed millions of people, and the vaccine has hardly killed anyone at all. It's extremely rare. So just logically, just by that information alone, why are you resisting getting a vaccination when you know that Delta is going to reach everyone?
If there was really a problem with vaccines, we'd be seeing lots of people being hospitalized right now for like severe vaccine reactions, and there's nobody.
No, I mean, you can't hide something like that.
No.
The other thing that's interesting, I think, you're seeing the typical, reactionary institutions like the police unions, the Fraternal Order of the Police, are 100% opposed to mandatory vaccinations. Now, they're first responders. They should be vaccinated, right? And in a normal, rational sense, there would just be no question there. The head of the union of said, I think John Catanzara, something like that, equated vaccine mandates to Nazis forcing people into gas chambers. This is just crazy shit.
I wonder if John Catanzara, or whatever his name is, knows that COVID was the leading cause of death among cops in the last year.
I don't know. He's probably denying it. He probably heard it and it went right through, didn't even register, right?
It's like way up. It's way more than even gunfire or anything
crazy.
Else like that. It's the leading cause of death.
But Sean, Blue Lives Matter.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right.
I can't even anymore with this. It's just, and this idea that somehow it's a matter of freedom. When Trump got up there, he got booed for asking people to take vaccines. And then he's like, oh, yeah, I know you have to have your freedom, but, might be a good idea to take it. And it's just, this has nothing to do with freedom. The right in this country has completely destroyed the notion of public accountability and public health. It's insanity.
Yeah, I think he's only saying that to those people because that's who it's killing now. It's his supporters who are unvaccinated. Yeah. The five states with the highest death rates are the 5 states with the lowest vaccination rates. It's not a coincidence.
Not at all.
It's so self-destructive. I mean, when it gets to that level of self-destruction, it's a kind of pathology. It really is. Not being able to see what's going on and just reacting to this propaganda and these.
It's some real Jim Jones shit that's going on right now with Republicans. It's unbelievable. And even the schools, like they insisted that the schools be reopened, and almost every school district that's reopened in the country has shut down within a matter of days of reopening.
Yeah, I mean, the science is pretty clear that Delta was much, much more infectious. It was a different kind of disease, really, in a lot of ways, almost a separate thing. And they just didn't want to hear any of that, No. Now, on the good news side, there's been a lot of movement by corporations, local governments, and so forth, to begin to be imposing mask mandates anyhow, and even getting people vaccinated through mandates. So it's beginning to happen. It's way too haphazard. It should be much more systematic. It should be much more coordinated, but at least it's better than nothing. I think a lot of people are still taking this seriously. And if it wasn't for that, we'd be in far worse shape, honestly.
Yeah, I was seeing that some health insurance companies are raising premiums on those who won't get vaccinated as well. Talk about the free market.
Mm-hmm. I think it was Delta Airlines. There's no mandate for vaccinations, but you're going to get dinged for like $200 a month extra if you don't get it. So
that will motivate some people.
Good for them.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention before we move on is China. China it's almost left the news. We hardly ever hear about it, but it reported that it's gotten Delta fully under control. I believe it or not, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I'm skeptical of China because, look, I mean, probably about a month or two in 2020, after the pandemic started, they also stopped reporting casualty figures.
Yes, they did.
So we have no idea what's going on in China.
And even before then, they weren't really reporting them accurately. The other thing that's interesting, though, they announced a policy, an official policy of holding the unvaccinated accountable for spreading the disease. Like it's a crime now.
Well, as it should be.
Totally different.
When we're taking our cues and we're being embarrassed by China's, better handling of the pandemic, then that's really saying something.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our main topic. And so we'll begin with thinking about secularism, right? A secular society includes the individual choice either to be religious or not. It allows for religious communities within that scope. It also allows for diversity of thought, religious and non-religious. It does not allow for religious rule. That's the crux of it, keeping all governance secular on the local, state, and federal level. And that's our position here on the Radical Secular. To start, that's our base position, and we all deviate from that to some extent, but that's our official position. This show focuses on those who would impose religious rule in the modern world. That's where we're at right here. There are only 7 countries out of more than 200 that squarely fall into this category: Yemen, Vatican City, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, Iran, and of course, Afghanistan. And the rest of the world has committed, more or less to different degrees, to secularism, meaning that they restrict policy making to non-religious means and institutions. And all the major developed nations, the ones that are most successful, are firmly secular in that regard. So the historical context that created secularism is 3 centuries of evolving modernity, right? Beginning with the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, and then the world transformed by the industrial age and technology that was spawned by that Age of Reason. Religious fundamentalists are the vanguard against this change. They are the vanguard against secularism and secular society, which means they're directly challenging the Enlightenment project. And later on, of course, as the centuries move forward, the social justice project has started about a century ago and really got going, really with the emancipation of slavery. And these fundamentalists that's the point of the spear there. They're leading the charge against encroaching secularism. They think that is the evil, the existential threat that exists in the world. And you know what? Here's the thing. Based on this general social survey that's done every year, it's been going on for many decades, around 70% of members of the silent generation say that they know that God really exists today and have no doubts about it. 63% of baby boomers and Generation Xers feel the same way. But millennials and Gen Zs are very different. 44% and 33% respectively feel that way. So this is a very significant shift in human consciousness, right? And over 40% of the youngest Americans claim no religious affiliation whatsoever. Only a quarter say they attend religious services weekly or more. This transformation is defining the ethics and morals that shape society. And this is really what it's all about, guys. I want to read you a quote from Phil Zuckerman in his book, What It Means to Be Moral. Then I want us to take a little critical look at morality here and this quote, and then move from there. So, quote, in terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable health care for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, transgender rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, the government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, The correlation remains: the most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference.
No surprise.
My own feeling is that this correlation is fair, but it's also a bit one-dimensional, which we can talk about later. Catholicism, for example, has a long tradition of helping the poor and the marginalized. Mainline progressive Protestant churches are certainly do as well. But the correlation really does seem to apply particularly well to the evangelical community and fundamentalists, the most ardent voices of Christianity today, the ones in control of red states that still hold great power in Congress. It is this cohort that is a threat to the compassionate morality described here in this quote by Zuckerman. So here's my first question. To what extent should we be discriminating between different religious voices when it is evangelicals who are the direct threat, the ones trying to impose theocracy?
I got a long answer on this. Drew, you want to go first?
Man, there's a lot to unpack in all that. There's a lot of nuance in the world. We hear, are very critical of religion and religious thinking and fundamentalism, and anti-scientific reasoning and all that. But I don't think every single religious person is a fundamentalist, right? Like they outnumber us, 6-4 or 7-3 or whatever the figures were that you were reading. So I think that we'd be in some serious shit if that was the case. So I think it's there is a degree of nuance to recognize there. For example, Sean, I know you and I were adamantly supporting and shaming anyone who wouldn't support a Christian for the presidency in 2016, Hillary Clinton, right? So right. I think there's nuance there. Absolutely.
Well, it depends a lot. Like for example, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, these are all people who go to church, and yet they don't allow their beliefs to interfere in any way. Like, for example, Joe Biden says he's personally against abortion, but he would never allow that to affect public policy. And I think that's official secularism. But I think we have to look at, why is he personally against abortion? Like that. I don't really care because, as long as he's not using that to make policy, but why would he be against that? So when it comes to my answer to this, most people really don't like my answer because even amongst us, there are strong disagreements. And I think it's fine. Reasonable people can disagree on both the scope and political methodology of secularism. But my position, and it's no secret, is that all religions and even mildly spiritual points of view represent a dangerous and very slippery slope toward theocracy. What if Biden changed his mind, right? What if he said, I'm personally against this and I'm gonna put that view into law, right? What's stopping him? So, but I want to explain what I'm getting at when I say this, that it's a slippery slope and that it even covers people who are, quote, spiritual. It'll take me a few minutes to say this, but I was listening yesterday to a very interesting episode of the podcast Straight White American Jesus. And I always want to give a shout out to Brad Onishi whenever I can, because he's doing great work and it's just a kick-ass name for a podcast. So if you like our podcast, you're definitely going to like Straight White American Jesus. And the episode I'm referring to is dated August 25th, 2021, and it's called Ex-Evangelical Apologetics, Christianity and Capitalism. And he goes deeply into the connection between American evangelicals and a poor-shaming, victim-blaming form of libertarianism that equates wealth with godliness and poverty with sin. It's a deeply Calvinist and puritanical mindset that valorizes suffering and hard work for low pay. And it also justifies extreme wealth and inequality. This connection between Christianity and ultra-libertarian capitalism has, of course, been developed over many decades. It was started out in opposition to the New Deal and social spending, and it later became a cultural agenda to bolster right-wing candidates and just benefit the very wealthy. So this is kind of ironic, since the biblical Jesus character was very explicit in his support for taking care of the poor. This non-biblical twist on Christianity is very much related to how the evangelical right has turned opposing abortion and LGBT rights into a litmus test for their party, even though these subjects are barely mentioned in the Bible. But the root of this agenda and how it's made inroads into the American psyche has been the attempt to connect morality in general to religion. and conversely to equate secularism and atheism with immorality, the devil, and sin. You hear this all constantly. Baby eating atheists, whatever. But Christian so-called morality, of course, as we've seen demonstrated amply in the Catholic Church as well as in American Protestantism, has failed to end poverty. It's failed to protect the vulnerable, either inside the churches or outside. And there's this never-ending parade of child sexual abuse scandals, which proves this. And that's not even mentioning the typical abusive patriarchal family structure of male headship. And we see rampant domestic abuse, adultery, and rape taking place within supposedly Christian communities. And we've seen these communities mounting rabid opposition to sex education, especially centering around sexual consent, right? And we have to ask ourselves why Christians have such a problem with consent. And I think we'll explore this later on, but this alone should be a glaring red flag that they don't want to talk about consent. And what that red flag really tells us is that Christian morality is anything but moral.
Yeah, this is really a moral question, isn't it? We're talking about right now. Why are we challenging fundamentalism? We're doing it on a moral basis, right? And morality is not a purview of religion. It is clearly more than that, far more than that. It comes from our own nature, our own evolution as human beings, our own social nature. Right? We're group social people, and we need to get along. That's where morality comes from. That's what's made us successful in this world. I do want to say a couple of things before you move on, Sean, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
First, the thing about looking at politicians, there's nuance there. And Drew, you're absolutely right. I agree with you that we need to be nuanced about this. And I generally fall in line with your thinking on this. But in terms of politician, I have to say politicians really have to be religious. Do you know what is it? America is maybe 70% religious and 30% agnostic and atheist, right? Something like that.
Something like that.
Do you know what it is in Congress? 0.02% are not religious. I mean, it's like it's almost like a calling card. If you're an atheist, you're not going to get elected, right? So you have to push that sort of part of your resume. But anyway, getting back to this topic here, I think we need to really think about this as a challenge to our sense of morality, that we have an evolving morality, right? It's coming from things like the Enlightenment Project, and it's still working itself through. It didn't stop there, right? It evolved into social justice, and it's still doing that. And now we have constantly this reactionary force that's trying to stop that evolution, right? And so in that sense, Sean, I get what you mean about religion, because religion has this tradition of claiming, the moral high ground, and we have to challenge that as well. But I also do see, Drew's point that we have to sort of think about this. People are religious in our society, and overwhelmingly so, and that's just a fact. And we have to, incorporate that into our politics and our thinking and our philosophy. And we can work, and you're absolutely right from your point of view, Sean, to work on challenging religion as a whole. I wouldn't tell you to stop doing that. No way. Yeah. That's a good perspective that needs to be out there.
Yeah, Sean, I think you're absolutely right on a lot of levels, just in the sense of all of this kind of thinking, this sort of, anti-scientific reasoning, whether it's rooted in religion, whether it's rooted in quote unquote spirituality, or, in some of our discussions, we've talked about the, what we call the woo bullshit, right?
Yep.
Energy crystals and all that kind of new agey sort of crap, right? It's all problematic. Like in that sense, you're absolutely right. And
we're seeing it in this pandemic, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you follow those trains of logic to their conclusion, they don't go to good places. But I feel like they are kind of in different places sometimes in that order.
Well, there's a lot of good coming out topics coming up here, and I want to say that yes, I think it is kind of a prerequisite. You have to profess some religion to get elected to public office in the U.S. And I think Obama basically governed as an atheist. I mean, he gave a shout out to non-believers. Clinton, her faith is more important to her. I think Biden as well. But, Biden caught flack. I mean, he was like, they jerked his chain. The Catholic Church tried to jerk his chain by,
they did.
Denying him communion. And then it was hilarious that the one of the bishops who was involved in that got caught on Grindr. But, this is what we're dealing with here. And there is a definite negative correlation between, in terms of scientific adherence and willingness to accept secular governance and religious belief. It just is. So,
yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit more about it too, in terms of the conservative moral hierarchy, because that's really what,
Please do.
Really what this comes down to. And I just want to emphasize that we're not against hierarchy here on the Radical Secular. If your place in hierarchy is earned through knowledge, skill, good character, or leadership, then it's deserved. You should be honored for that, and you should have an honored place in society. So, but the conservative moral hierarchy turns this idea of meritocracy upside down. They state their moral hierarchy as kind of the natural order of things, and it therefore has nothing to do with achievement, and it can't be opposed. It's a recipe for dictatorship. And this is from George Lakoff, and I'm just going to read through it real briefly. It starts out: God above man, man above nature, the disciplined above the undisciplined, the rich above the poor, employers above employees, adults above children, Western culture above other cultures, America above other countries, men above women, whites above non-whites, Christians above non-Christians, and straights above gays. Now, this conservative moral hierarchy is everything we oppose, and every episode that we have done since we started has been railing against this moral hierarchy. And it's not only destroying our politics, it's destroying the earth, right? I mean, our very home, everything you talk about, Joe, about climate change. This is all. Christians would have been on it if they cared about the creation. And there was a small group of Christians that were into this creation care thing, and they were just swamped by the conservative moral hierarchy and just marginalized. And almost no Christian denominations at this point care about the climate. So,
yeah.
And it doesn't matter. They don't care. The Republican leadership is just riding this to power and doesn't care who gets hurt. And but there's something really interesting that Brad Onishi tweeted out, and it puts Christians on record as openly and vocally opposing empathy and compassion. And Brad Onishi tweeted out a screen grab, and it was from an article that was written in 2019 by Joe Rigney of the site Desiring God. And his article, there's two articles actually. The first one was called "Killing Them Softly: Compassion That Warms Satan's Heart." And the second one was called "The Enticing Sin of Empathy: How Satan Corrupts Through Compassion." And I just like, right?
Yeah. It's really just a tragedy that we have to deal with this ideology now in such force. But I was thinking when you were reading that list of moral hierarchies, conservative. There was this thing on Facebook. I saw this guy that was a real right winger. Was like, aren't we on the wrong side? He was looking at all the things that Taliban stand for. And he's like, he's really wondering, well, aren't we on the wrong side? Look, they're against gays. So it's just like, this is what we're talking about. This universality of fundamentalism and this hostility towards empathy and towards inclusion.
Yeah, I saw a meme earlier this week that showed the Taliban taking over, I think it was the presidential office in Kabul. And then right underneath that, it showed, the January 6th insurrectionists. It's the same shit,
They're the same people, the pickup trucks and people riding around in the back of pickup trucks with flags, right?
Yeah.
But it's this idea of demonizing empathy and compassion is so, it's so vicious. And I wanted to mention, anyone familiar with Christian apologetics has read C.S. Lewis and will be familiar with the book The Screwtape Letters, in which Lewis writes a fictional dialogue between a senior devil or tempter named Screwtape and his apprentice Wormwood. Rigney's article it's written in this form, okay? It's written as a letter from Screwtape, right? And it's just demonizing, compassion and empathy. And, I don't really even want to get started discussing the preposterous notion of a devil that sits around all day looking for ways to tempt humans and lead them astray. Even when I was still a kid attending religious school, I found the concept of the devil to be even more preposterous than the concept of an all-seeing, all-knowing God. And I absolutely hated the Screwtape Letters, which we had to read in 11th grade. Ugh. Like all religious apologetics, C.S. Lewis work has this smarmy, unctuous quality of condescension and all-knowingness. In a certain sense, Screwtape Letters could almost be read as a kind of satire on religion, but who knows what he was really going for. It's just kind of this head-shaking, finger-wagging Christian apologetics that's circular, and it assumes its own premise, right? We're all supposed to take this tortured dialogue between senior and junior devils seriously without laughing our asses off at the absurdity of this concept. But in this particular modern redux of the Screwtape Letters, this guy Rigney really pulls back the curtain on what evangelicals are all about, which is actually the reverse of compassion or empathy, because religion is about what is written in Scripture as so-called revealed truth, and also the individualist kind of personal walk with God. Evangelicals often conveniently ignore the more compassionate attitudes that Jesus expressed, such as being your brother's keeper. And so now I'm getting to the part where I'm going to explain why I believe that all religion and spirituality leads to dangerous nonsense when applied to politics. Because when you're talking about any form of revealed truth, it's inevitably things that were written down by human beings. And then these written scriptures are further interpreted by other human beings. So if we observe, for example, that some religious teaching is causing suffering, according to Joe Rigney, this form of compassion is doing the devil's work, because we are identifying with the feelings of a suffering person instead of what he might think is best for that person in society. And so
right.
Religion just inherently, by the fact that it has this scripture, sidesteps feedback and our feelings of empathy that we're just asked to put aside because Scripture says so. And it was just some guy who wrote something, right? And it's supposed to supersede all of our human feelings of brotherhood, fair play, and justice. And this is something we've talked about from the very beginning with Christoph, the just world fallacy, and that everything happens for a reason or is a part of God's plan. And the second part of this justification is the idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And there are numerous instances in Scripture, such as the book of Job, where people go through immense suffering because they are being tested by God, right? And of course, the canonical example where Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son Isaac as a test of loyalty. And there are numerous other biblical stories of meting out scriptural summary justice and punishment, such as the Old Testament notion of killing rebellious children. So this kind of touches on our discussion of capital punishment from a few weeks ago, because in highly religious cultures around the world, including the early American colonies under Puritanism, religion was used to support capital punishment, which requires suspending any notion of rehabilitation and certainly suspending our compassion or empathy for the condemned.
Yeah, I mean, we took a deep dive into that, and I think at the end of it, we both kind of came to the conclusion that the death penalty generally was barbaric, and that our civilization wasn't really in a place to implement it, except in the absolute most surefire and extreme of cases, like in that of, say, Timothy McVeigh. So I definitely see the parallel between that bloodlust that we see on the right in terms of the use of the death penalty and these sort of religious stories and fables that you're talking about, like Job, which I've always thought is a crazy story.
This reminds me, evangelicals of fundamentalists really support the death penalty, but this reminds me, I've been listening to Democracy in Chains just on my drives and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I read it a while ago and I'm listening to it, and this so fits into the philosophy that was coming out of like the Cato Institute and the Koch brothers, and all that about the dangers of compassion and being too compassionate on a policy level, right?
Yeah,
Like
moral hazard.
Moral hazards. And so, there is this linkage between talk about capital punishment, talk about capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. Capitalism is linked with this Protestant evangelical fundamentalism so tightly at this point, right? Mm-hmm. This is one of the points of linkages. The fact that you cannot be compassionate, you have to be ruthless to have a good society. And, it's kind of insane.
Well, Brad Onishi on his podcast, Straight White American Jesus, he, the one that I'm referring to, he brings up a more compassionate doctrine, which is the Lutheran religious perspective, such as what underpins the Nordic model of the social welfare state in places like Denmark. And these places are some of the happiest countries in the world. And those metrics aren't just about health and well-being. They are necessarily about community and social welfare. These people pay high taxes, but in exchange, they have a tremendously strong social safety net, including absolutely free university education, childcare, pensions, vacations, the works. You're not going to be on the street in those countries. And Onishi says that this is because the Reformation got rid of the idea that faith and works could be separated. Okay. And this is in stark contrast to the later American emphasis on faith alone. This idea that by simply believing in Jesus Christ, a person could be saved. Mm-hmm. And in the Nordic model, the government is understood to be a kind of partner with believers in helping those in need. So almost an extension of the church, right? Because like the church and state used to be melded. And so any social welfare was going to come partially from the church. But now it's completely separated. And the believers are seeing this as sort of, this is how we express our faith. And so go ahead.
I'm saying, as opposed to the Calvinist model here in this country, right? I think that would be probably the best way to put it, which is pushing, rather than sort of like the social democracy or democratic socialism you see in the Nordic countries, is pushing, neoliberalism, which is a very different political economy that we're very critical of here.
And this is where Onishi kind of lost me, though, because the obvious flaw in that logic is that American evangelicals are all Protestant, right? I mean, they all came from the same lineage. Just because Lutherans aren't like that, and so American evangelicals got caught up in this, and they've completely adapted themselves to Trumpism. So moderate religion doesn't really protect us.
That's a good point. I mean, honestly, if moderate religious people and progressive religious people really feel that this is an unfair statement, that we're labeling them unfairly, they need to stand up and challenge these extremists in religion, because they're the biggest voice. They are creating the image of what Christianity is right now in the world and to Americans, right? So if you are a progressive, compassionate religious person, then it's really up to you to show that that's meaningful and important, that you're not just subsumed by these religious politics that are dominating over us.
Well, this might be a bad example because Thomas Jefferson had slaves and raped one of his slaves. So, but he did have a version of the Bible where he cut out the sort of vicious parts and kept the rest, right? And so, I will believe a moderate Christian when they call for these pages to be ripped out of the Bible that talk about mistreating women and slavery and all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, when has anyone in any church in America ever called for passages of scripture to be disavowed?
Only the UU church, I think.
Maybe the Unitarians are okay, but my point is, moderate isn't as moderate as we might think.
Well, there's that part of it. There's also just the political, cultural side of it. They are. We're advocating for a pluralistic society. Mm-hmm. And so we have to say, well, as long as you're not causing direct harm like the fundamentalists are, then you have a right to express your own views of life and your own practices within the bounds of being socially responsible. And if people can do that, then that's secularism. That is covered under secularism. So there's that. What you're talking about, Sean, is more of a philosophical point, right? Not a political point, but a philosophical one, and a cultural one, and that's different.
Ideas have consequences, right? And so if we think about a fundamentalist, that person is someone who is most committed to taking their scriptures literally. Moderate religious believers are those who will go like, well, maybe not the slavery part, right? Okay. And so they water it down with empathy and compassion. They literally water down their fundamentalism with empathy and compassion. And, you mentioned this thing at the beginning that from Phil Zuckerman, the quote, where he said that secularists have the most compassionate views of governments. And this is borne out in these very secularized systems of like Lutheran Protestantism that exists in Denmark and other European countries. And I think we have to admit that this isn't a coincidence, right? Yeah,
it's on paper, baby. It's there, right? The data is all there. Well, of course, it's data. Nobody cares about that, right? But
if moderation is better than fundamentalism, then pure secularism with no religion is best of all. I mean, that's my premise.
Drew, what do you think?
I mean, if ignorance is bliss, enlightenment is punishment.
Oh.
I mean, I think Sean is right in his criticisms of all this stuff. I think, there's, I hate to say a middle ground, but I think there's a somewhere in between where, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, where we can be critical of these ideas as our jumping off point for these discussions and our worldview, while at the same time recognizing their varying degrees of actual damage in the world and understanding nuance and that each individual is different, and that people all view and behave on these beliefs differently.
And I know this kind of sucks to hear, but you have to be mindful of not splitting the leftist coalition, because a lot of people of color are very religious, and there's a lot of religious people that are with us in terms of trying to stop the right's agenda. So we have to be very mindful of that.
Listen, if we could rely on the Supreme Court to uphold secularism, then we wouldn't have anything to worry about. I say, believe whatever you want.
Oh, but we can't.
We cannot. And so in a democracy, beliefs are going to have consequences. And so the more people remain religious, the more they're going to vote for draconian policies and right-wing agendas. And, and they've got a Supreme Court now that's going to uphold that stuff. So, That's really all I had on that, other than to say that, just to remind everybody of what Sam Harris said 20 years ago in The End of Faith, that so-called moderate religious adherents continue to make the world safe for extremists by keeping religious ideas off limits to criticism. And and even the New Agers, our friends over at Conspirituality Podcast, I mean, they have shown in spades how the New Age and the anti-vax and the spiritual and the yoga community are all kind of have come together to really, they're as big, if not a bigger threat to science and reason and secularism as Christians.
So, Sean, I just do want to say something about your comment regarding sort of soft spirituality and New Agers and so forth. One of the problems that we have here is a question of semantics, because for some people, the idea of being empathic is spiritual to them. That's how they define it for themselves. It's kind of a new modern way of thinking about spiritualism, and not necessarily, that doesn't mean like spirits and ghosts or angels necessarily. So like being compassionate, being mindful of nature, connections with nature, all that stuff is to people a spiritual experience. So that's not what you're talking about, I don't think, right?
No, not at all. I'm talking about the airy-fairy kind of woo shit, which some encompasses some of yoga, some of Buddhism. There's just a lot of stuff that really lends itself towards a kind of, neo-left libertarian, conspiratorial, anti-government, anti-science.
Yeah. I call them the neo-hippies.
The neo-hippies, yeah. And a lot of them, interestingly enough, became Trumpers, and some of these people are hardcore Trumpers now. And I saw people make this journey from being hard lefty, conspiritual types to full on Trumpers. And this is why I just think religion it's poison. I mean, and not what you're talking about, Joe, not a generalized, because what you're talking about seems to be more humanist, right? If you have empathy and compassion and you're interested in nature and and systems and the environment, that's like us. Okay. That's how we feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it boils down to life's big questions, right? Like, why are we here? Where do we go when we die? What happens when after we're dead, right? And it's like, I don't think that anyone alive has the answer to any of these questions, right? And so I think it's okay to have different ideas about that, since there is no answer, as long as you're not using those ideas to implement social policy or do harm, basically through government.
Right, but as an idea, okay, I think I have to say religion is poison, and same thing with spirituality, right? I don't see an exception to that. A truly secular, enlightenment-based society must create firm checks and balances on religious belief impinging onto the legal and political sphere. No nation that fails to check the religious impulse in all of its varied forms can ever be free from the risk of falling into theocracy. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it's a fair point. We have a difference of opinion here in some respect. We did a show on this, remember, a little while back, about looking at sort of consciousness and so forth, about what is, reasonable to consider versus the woo stuff, right? Where's that line, right? When do you cross it, right? So, but yeah, granted, your point is well taken, I think. I do want to move on a little bit. I don't have deep personal experience with fundamentalism. I don't. My family's been fairly secular. Even though my mother was religious, my father was an atheist, and my mother never pushed it on us. So I don't have that. But you guys, I think, do. I know you, Sean, you do. So, and this show is about challenging the agenda of this most religious group we're talking about here. How have you encountered this in your life, Sean? I know you've talked about it before, but if you can just kind of sort of reiterate some of it for us. And also then, Drew, I don't really know a lot about your religious background, but it would be interesting to know a little bit about yours too.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point about mine. I mean, I was raised in a cult. My parents were the cult leaders. They claimed to take messages from ascended masters, and they had a large following, as possibly as many as 50,000 people.
That's kind of woo-woo.
Yeah, it's pretty woo. It's pretty woo, and especially when she was predicting things like nuclear war and stuff like that, and people were believing her and making big decisions in their lives based on that. So it took a lot for me to get out of that, and there's a lot of people I grew up with who are not out of it, who are still in it. So I don't really, I could go into endless stories about it, but I don't think that's going to serve our purposes today.
Okay, fair enough. Drew, what do you think?
Well, I'm like you, Joe. I don't have a ton of personal experience with direct fundamentalism. I was raised in a pretty secular home. My mother had a very religious upbringing with the nuns and the hitting them with the rulers and all that kind of stuff. And so the way she told me is that, after I was born, my father, who is not a particularly religious man, he's kind of like, well, I don't know, kind of maybe the kind of attitude, and he kind of suggested gently, like, well, maybe now we should go to church on Sundays because that's what like families do or what have you, And my mom was just like, no.
Good for her.
Like, no way I'm putting my kids through all that crap that I had to deal with when I was a child. So I was very fortunate in that regard. I didn't even understand or know about religion until I got to kindergarten. And on one of the first days, if not the first day, a kid asked me if I believed in God. And I said, what's that? And they said, he's an invisible man who lives in the sky and watches over us. And I said, that's silly.
Mm-hmm.
Kindergarten.
Yeah. Wow.
That would be anybody's first reaction upon hearing about this. So if you're not indoctrinated, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, let's go ahead and continue without this. I just really wanted to get a sort of personal sense of it. I think the viewers would be interested in that. I want to say one thing that might surprise some people here. that fundamentalism is even though they're anti-modern, it is a modern phenomenon in the way we're seeing it. Prior to modernism, there was no challenge to theocracy. Right? There was no need to challenge theocracy and the divine rights of kings. So, fundamentalism is a resistance movement to modernity. That's what makes it fundamentalism as we experience it. As we see it in politics. It's a modern phenomenon that way. Fundamentalists define themselves as being in a cosmic battle against the evil of modernity, Satan's work. They are anti-secular by design, and particularly that you see things like in their discourse, in their narrative, signs of prophecies in governments and world government and end of times rhetoric and all of that stuff that we hear on occasion. And Sean, you probably know a lot more about this than I do because you were directly exposed to it. Now, Drew, not somebody like you who's very attuned to popular culture. What trends have you seen in the arts, in films and media that speak to this sort of bizarre fundamentalist agenda and this belief system that I just sort of mentioned here?
Well, I see more of a backlash to our popular culture, really, because I think a lot of our popular culture is actually rather secular humanist. If you look at like the major franchises that are big in our country and in our culture, Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel. These big powerhouse entertainment franchises that are dominating the box office, dominating financially. You see a lot of backlash from the Christian right about the values that they put forth because they're all very pro inclusion. They're very pro LGBT. They're very pro minority representation. And these sorts of things upset that white Christian worldview. And the more they lean into it, as Disney has with some of these in particular, the more outrage you're seeing from it.
Yeah, interesting. Good points. Yeah, I do definitely see that as well. And I think there is definitely a trend there that, and this is part of the existential angst that the religious right feels, right? Sean, I do want to get a little bit of this play of the halls of power around end time narratives, because it isn't just a cultural phenomena, it's a political one, which is really kind of frightening.
Yeah, well, power is really the key term to understand here. And Christoph and I discussed this at length in our book introduction for Coral Anacatile that we wrote together recently, and that's going to be being published soon. But we talked about this as the American Christian Power Apparatus, or ACPA. Not a very good acronym, but it works. That's exactly what it is, right? Fundamentalism masquerades as a strong submission to a deity and extreme adherence to the detailed observance of rituals and traditions of worship. But it's in fact a bait and switch because, like you said, this is a reactionary movement against modernity. It's 100% concerned with what the early Catholic Church called temporal power, right? Which is to say secular power. Obviously, the Latin root of the word temporal is tempus, meaning that the phrase temporal power is concerned with time. And that can be interpreted to mean power over the time human beings are alive on earth as opposed to the afterlife, right?
Okay, yeah.
All they ever do is talk about the afterlife and heaven and God and everything, but what they're really concerned about is now, okay? And fundamentalists, they claim to be waging this spiritual warfare and to be concerned with saving souls. This is the greatest lie of all time. They actually are fighting a physical battle, a pitched battle for earthly physical power. And by that, I mean they want it all. They want all the money, all the authority. They want governance. They want to control every aspect of life for every single human being alive on earth. And they are fighting firmly on secular turf. That is to say, our turf, okay? They're fighting us 24/7 to pollute the public discourse, to undermine science, and to worm their way into iron-fisted control of every human institution, bar none. And I really want to emphasize this here because we have to sidestep this endless, unresolvable debate over whether or not there's an afterlife. And there's absolutely no evidence for such a thing. We're mammals. Mammals die like every other species of life on Earth. The concept that the spirit carries on, whether it's reincarnation or whether it's heaven, I don't care. It's It's one of the core lies of fundamentalism. And I just can't say this strongly enough, that the moment you accept that you have even one more second of life after your body dies is the moment you become fodder for fundamentalism. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And this is what extends the power of fundamentalism and fundamentalist thinking into more watered down versions of religion and even the so-called personal versions of spirituality. And it's the basic gambit. Even robots and replicants in fiction don't want to die. As the famous line from Blade Runner, spoken by Roy Batty to his creator, Eldon Tyrell, he's crushing his skull. I want more life, fucker, right? Nobody can forget that, because here's this replicant who isn't even human, and he doesn't want to die. And we can relate to him, especially when he gives that amazing speech at the end, But nobody likes the idea of ceasing to exist. And so by allowing themselves to wait and hope for an afterlife, human beings have opened the door to every manner of fundamentalist hijacking of civil society. And we keep holding this, this door open with our every thought of what we think it's going to be like after we die. And so the power of this end times narrative is really not that complicated. It's, fundamentalism is the most powerful force of conservatism on the planet, and it encompasses tribalism, nationalism, hierarchical family organization, and traditional gender roles centered around reproduction. So modernity is breaking down the old structures in every single one of those areas, especially in the areas of multiculturalism and LGBT acceptance, right? Yeah. So when fundamentalists fulminate about the end times, they're not kidding. Modernity really does represent the end of their old ways of life that are tied to tribalism, blood and soil, and of course, as we always point out, toil. Labor-saving devices we've invented in the past 2 centuries have destroyed the need for the so-called Puritan work ethic.
Right. And it's not liberals that are doing this, it's modernity. Right. That's what people don't understand. Liberals are an aspect, a part of the political expression of what's going on, but the actual mechanisms that are creating all this destruction of the old are things like technology and capitalism. Right. They are the fundamentals of modern change. They are migration. They are really structure around the political economy, not around politics themselves. And they blame everything on, the liberals this and the liberals that, or the socialists evil and so forth. But they miss the whole point. This is evolution. This is global evolution.
What you really, when you talk to people, and I've had extensive conversations with people, and they are mad that we're eliminating suffering. Okay, that's what it comes down to. That technology is eliminating suffering. And suffering is the key metric of godliness across nearly all the world's religions. They valorize it. And modernity has mitigated and ended a great deal of suffering. Naturally, it's reduced the need for scared and suffering masses of people to seek refuge in the world's churches, temples, and mosques. And religious organizations, they broadly failed to halt the progress of modernity. And they use modern technology. And so their response, though, is the same as it's always been, to forecast a disaster.
Yeah.
But it's projection, because what they're really saying is this is a disaster for us, for our religious organization, and that's going to result in disaster for the entire world, because what would the world be without religion? So they...
And I couldn't agree with you more that it really is about worldly power, right? They're after real power. They're after the reins of government, the power of the state, completely, 100%. They may talk about other things, but that's what they're doing, right? And in a similar way, there's this linkage with libertarianism, right? Mm-hmm. And it's also completely false, because they're incredibly statist, if you can use that term, in their strategies. They want to use the state as their hammer to get things done. Right, the federal government especially. That's their entire strategy. They're changing. They've infiltrated the courts. They've done state houses. All of that. It's really, really based on this very modern strategy. Right. In fact, a lot of them will literally model themselves after people like Lenin. And also the sort of the grassroots activism of the '60s. Right. That's what they're using to gain power.
They study Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals like it's the fucking Bible, and they have used those tactics against us. And furthermore, when they get in power, they do things like Texas Governor Abbott, who has banned local governments from he's used the power of his governorship to ban counties and states from putting in public health measures. And so it's like they are all about the power. It's just different kind of power than what governments have traditionally had. So,
Drew, what do you think about these contradictions? I mean, they seem to really clearly to be paradoxes or contradictions, don't you think?
I mean, yeah, this kind of speaks to what I was saying about nuance. I think we just have to recognize the varying aspects in all of this stuff. That I think Sean is right when he says ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely correct. But I think those consequences all vary depending on what it is we're talking about, right? So
yeah, you were saying
just
that
depends.
You were saying that you think there's a real secular sort of humanist aspect to our society and our culture. How do you think that people see this? I mean, are people like aware of these machinations? Do you think? Do you see that?
I mean, I think some are and some aren't. I think there are a lot of people who are just kind of tuned out and not really paying attention to any of these sort of social issues or political issues the way that guys like us are, the people like us are. At the same time, I think there are plenty of people who are plugged in, but there are a lot of who are not.
Do you see any generational differences?
It's hard to say. So I'm pretty in tune with like my generation, but like the generation below me, the Gen Zs or whatever you want to call them. I don't know what they're thinking. They're all into like Fortnite or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Sean, what about you?
Well, what's interesting about all of this is that, conservatives didn't have a problem with Disney. They didn't have as much of a problem with Hollywood in general. I mean, everybody went to the same movies, 10, 15 years ago until Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all these people started getting them whipped up into, opposing the social justice aspects of Hollywood because they saw, I mean, representation matters. And we've said this before, is that all of these, Hollywood has done a lot to move us forward and has done a lot for secularism. And the Christians aren't happy about it. And, what's interesting about this in terms of of this end times narrative, okay, is a lot of people, even liberals who aren't religious, will say things like society is going to collapse of its own weight through the destruction of meaning. And they'll point to various, just general ennui, drug use, crime, consumerism, lowbrow entertainment as a result of collapse of religious values. And I even hear this from liberals. And others will propose that it's not, we're not going to collapse, but God will somehow punish the world for modernity through natural or even man-made disasters. And so I just I guess what I'm getting at here is that these things all feed into each other, and it's bunkum. It's just bunkum of the worst kind. The world's not going to end except through environmental catastrophe or war. Those are the things we have to fear, not through the culture.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I do think that you're right about what you're saying regarding film and culture and whatnot moving us forward. We're at the cusp of the Shang-Chi film coming out. If you guys remember Black Panther, when that came out, it was a huge, huge deal and was a landmark for African-American cinema in general and had a huge cultural impact. It's hard to say whether Shang-Chi will have the same impact considering the state of theaters and all of that. But in terms of that kind of representation, I think it very well could.
People are going to see it. So
yeah, for sure. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another paradox. Speaking of paradoxes, fundamentalists claim to be anti-social, anti-collective in principle. They hate socialism. They hate any kind of collectivism. And they express belief in the individual. They're tied to capitalism and the free market and all that. and particularly, in the prosperity gospel adherence, which is really kind of just really bizarre stuff, if you ask me. However, they are extremely collective in practice. They are very hierarchical. They follow an order. They have a discipline. They really are social beings. And can either of you speak about that contradiction?
Well, I mean, religion has always they play the victim, okay, and they've continued to play the victim for thousands of years, and this gambit is their way in to sort of seizing all the mechanisms of power of the modern state to implement their clearly stated goal of a worldwide theocracy. Just to give you an example, okay, Christians don't want to pay taxes, and yet they want all of the help for the poor to be private charity, to go through them, right? And that allows them to control that money. But they highly object, even if it was the same amount of money, right? They all give 10% to their church. Well, what if we said, give that 10% to the government and give it to the poor? No. That's not what they're interested in. And this is the American Christian Power Apparatus in action. They are mobilized and motivated against government. And they're using what Robert Greene calls the surrender tactic to sort of feign weakness and gain sympathy and public support. And I want to read a brief quote from the preface to the 48 Laws of Power. I really love that book. I don't know if either of you guys have read it, but it has so many great insights. And this is from the introduction. And he says, to some people, the notion of consciously playing power games, no matter how indirect, seems evil, asocial, a relic of the past. They believe they can opt out of the game by behaving in ways that have nothing to do with power. You must beware of such people, for while they express such opinions outwardly, they are often among the most adept players at power. They utilize strategies that cleverly disguise the nature of the manipulation involved. These types, for example, will often display their weakness and lack of power as a kind of moral virtue. But true powerlessness, without any motive of self-interest, would not publicize its weakness to gain sympathy or respect. Making a show of one's weakness is actually a very effective strategy, subtle and deceptive in the game of power.
Interesting.
Okay, how many times have you seen Christians play the victim?
It's like their MO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when don't you?
When don't you? And so Christian nationalists have maintained this same sort of list of boogeymen for at least 100 years. And that list includes every secular institution that acts as a counterweight to religious authority. And let's be honest, I mean, they have been in charge, okay? I mean, Christian fundamentalists have been running this country for a long time. And so with the New Deal and everything else like that, things started to shift away from them. And that's this reactionary thing you're talking about, because who's on this list? Public schools, universities, secular education, by extension, the scientific establishment, the free and independent press, the educated elite. These are the people that make things work and who control the physical nuts and bolts of our society. The courts, which are legally bound to disperse impartial justice. The taxing and regulating authorities in local, state, and federal bureaucracies. The medical establishment and those who would require treatment of their children's medical conditions in accordance with best medical practices. You've seen these nutcases who don't let their kids be treated, right? I mean, that was the sort of the precursor for anti-vax. And social service and child welfare protective agencies, enforcers of truancy laws. You know, the Christians hate the idea that anybody's going to tell them how to raise their kids, even if they're harming their kids and even if they're not giving them a good education. So in each and every one of these cases, they paint themselves as victims whenever they're called on to conform to any laws or standards that apply to everyone. And if you notice how insidious this is, they are only being asked to do the same things as everyone else. Yet they claim that these laws and rules that apply universally nevertheless place a special burden on the fundamentalist and their families. To them, freedom of religion can only be achieved through the granting of exceptions and special privileges. You've heard this 1,000 times. Poor us. We're so weak and we're under siege by society on absolutely every level. All we want to do is be left alone to raise our children as we see fit and practice our religion. You know?
Yeah, I know. It's like, Tucker Carlson going up there and complaining about censorship when he's like has the biggest audience in the United States.
They're trying to silence me. Meanwhile, Yeah. Well, this is the classic surrender tactic that these fundamentalist groups use when in reality, they've since the 1950s, okay, with the addition of under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, the placing of in God we trust on the money, the capitulation of both political parties to participation in the National Prayer Breakfast, which is one of the largest power brokering events in the world.
Yeah.
Not just in our country. People from all over the world are at that thing. I mean, these Russians were at that thing. Right. It's just insane. So I don't think it's remotely an exaggeration to say that fundamentalist Christianity represents, the real power behind the United States government and has remained so for generations, despite whoever has won or lost any given election. And this remains true despite differences in outward appearance between Republicans who loudly profess their faith while in office versus the more secular presentation of Democrats. And that speaks a little bit to this, where we were talking about earlier about Clinton and Obama and Biden. They are still religious.
Yeah. Listen, let's take a look at sort of a direct look at what fundamentalists oppose about social justice, right? Feminists, for one. In their rhetoric, the destabilization of gender roles undermines the rule of God, the community, the family. They blame women's suffrage, birth control, and abortion. Any rights and agency that has been fought for and achieved for women in the last century is suspect. Why are fundamentalists so particularly fussed about women's rights?
Well, if you're used to being in power, then equality feels like oppression.
Yeah, there is that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to go back to one of our foundational texts here, which is The Reactionary Mind by Corey Robin. In that book, he discusses an extreme visceral fear among reactionaries that whatever forms of equality we seek to impose on society will not stop at the threshold of the family home. In other words, if we don't keep the conservative moral hierarchy in place in the larger society, that's going to mean that men will no longer be the unquestioned leaders in their families. And this terrifies conservative men like nothing else. And you just have to remember that prior to about 1980, marital rape was legal in all 50 US states. It's difficult for us to imagine.
Yeah.
Right? But
incredible.
Reactionary definitions of the marriage contract bear a lot of resemblance to slavery. And once having given their consent to a marriage, women are expected to behave like chattel, or at least they were. And that means that their body remains the property of the husband for the taking anytime he chooses. And this also extends to their capacity as broodmares, which is really reminiscent of the Handmaid's Tale notion that fertile women, they're more or less the property of society, with their fertility parceled out to commanders and the bearing of children as more or less of a community responsibility, right? Remember when they had their kids in the Handmaid's Tale, all the women got together in the community, and it was weird. But if they resist this, women would face brutal punishment. And in the case of the U.S., the way it was, in the 1950s, women were just beaten. They were just beaten or raped, and nothing was done about it. And it's just, the Handmaid's Tale is not that far from what many women have faced or are facing today in their traditional Christian marriages. So I don't know. I mean, Joe, I think that there's no greater threat to individual human rights than this notion of female fertility as collective male property. I mean, it extends to all aspects of the unearned conservative moral hierarchy, right?
Yeah, so best exemplified by The Handmaid's Tale, but that was just an allegory of really real life, I mean, it really was in many ways.
It's what they like. I mean, you see The Handmaid's Tale, and they may deny it, but this is their fantasy. This is absolutely what they want to see happen.
I'm not caught up on the most recent season of that show, and I need to, but it's hard to watch that series. It is hard to watch. It's a difficult show to watch.
It is.
Even though it's really well done, it's just, and another thing that, I know it's been mentioned, but, the fact that Elizabeth Moss, right? That's her name. Mm-hmm. She's a Scientologist.
I know. What a paradox here.
Like that's, do you not see any connection as you're reading these scripts and making this series? Any parallels at all? That. Oh yeah, between anything that you experienced with the crazy Xenu church, nothing at all. Okay, all right. I guess whatever.
That makes it doubly hard to watch. And I think that this is what you're pointing out here is a phenomenon that's true of almost no one thinks they're in a cult, right? It's other people who are in cults.
Right. Absolutely. And even though the cult is made up of 30 million people, it doesn't matter, right? It's still, if it's acting like a cult, it's still a cult. The size is irrelevant, right? People think cults are small and tiny and like fringe, and not necessarily.
Well, the Trump cult is one of the worst cults in the world history.
It really is. Yeah.
And it's huge.
Now, also, let's take a look at, let's put it this way. God, according to, these fundamentalist beliefs and Christian beliefs in general, have chosen Christians to call back the people of faith, to prepare the world for one final revival before Jesus returns to earth, right? There are Christians all over the world. Colonialism saw to that. So why are they so hostile in so many ways to brown and black people? Why does this movement have such a racist and white nationalist face? They have formed from the beginning. In 1990, the World's Christian Fundamentalist Association was this meeting, I think in New York City, first major gathering, right, to organize the political aspect of this. It was exclusively white, exclusively Protestant at the time, right from the start. And it has stayed this way all along. In fact, it's gotten more so in the last 20 years. It's been consistently anti-immigrant, because immigrants generally tend to be non-white. They generally tend to be non-Protestants in the United States. So what's the deal here, guys?
Well, I think if we've basically established that fundamentalism is reactionary, and if I can read a quote from the book, The Reactionary Mind, which really, I think, describes this very well.
Okay.
And he says, despite the very real differences between them, workers in a factory are like secretaries in an office, peasants on a manor, slaves on a plantation, even wives in a marriage, in that they live and labor in conditions of unequal power. They submit and obey, heeding the demands of their managers and masters, husbands and lords. They are disciplined and punished. They do much and receive little. Sometimes their lot is freely chosen. Workers contract with their employers, wives with their husbands, but its entailments seldom are. What contract, after all, could ever itemize the ins and outs, the daily pains and ongoing sufferance of a job or marriage? Throughout American history, the contract often has served as a conduit to unforeseen coercion and constraint, particularly in institutions like the workplace and the family, where men and women spend so much of their lives. Employment and marriage contracts have been interpreted by judges, themselves friendly to the interests of employers and husbands, to contain all sorts of unwritten and unwanted provisions of servitude, to which wives and workers tacitly consent, even when they have no knowledge of such provisions or wish to stipulate otherwise. End quote. And so this is, speaking to your point, it's not just white men versus white women, right, in terms of this hierarchy, but it also concerns keeping domestic servants in their place. Mm-hmm. Long after the abolishing of slavery, Black Americans continued to work as hired domestic help, almost always at poverty wages. Now today we see many Latinx immigrants, of course mainly women, playing this role. Larger social inequality delivers desperate female low-paid domestic workers, right? So there's an economic interest in this.
Yeah, good point.
It's not just birth control and abortion that drives men nuts. It's also women's economic equality. How many women in America are stuck in bad relationships where they suffer domestic abuse simply because they can't afford to leave? A substantial number of men strategically insulate themselves from relationship accountability by trapping women into domestic servitude and lives of abuse simply because the women lack the resources to strike out on their own. And there's also always an implied threat of violence that sadly too often becomes actualized. Even if they could potentially leave without being threatened with violence, many women choose to stay in abusive relationships because they fear economic ruin, having to take a huge hit in their standard of living and potentially losing access to their children. This was the story of Coral Annika Teal, who we interviewed in February in episode 33, which was called Raped for God. She eventually left her abusive marriage, and of course, she also lost her home and access to her 8 children and wound up having to work 2 minimum wage jobs to survive. So we can see that various forms of capitalist wage slavery and unequal wages for women are a huge part of maintaining the domestic hierarchy. Whenever you hear the term family values, you can be sure that keeping women subservient and financially dependent on men are a major plank in this reactionary platform. Family values is not even thinly veiled code for permanent patriarchal dominance. And let's be clear, the conservative moral hierarchy is explicitly religious. The very fact that God is at the top of this fake hierarchy tells you everything you need to know that the religious drive for power, first and foremost, is about the maintenance of the hierarchy. And we constantly harp on this, as our regular listeners know.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well,
Joe.
I mean, it's you're starting to see things come together here, right? You have this hostility towards the social democracy and the social welfare state and statism in general. It's how they perceive it. Because the state is actually, a social democracy creates checks and balances to try to ameliorate these power imbalances between women and men, between people of color and white people, and so forth. Literally, there's legal laws and so forth. For example, divorce laws and so forth that try to deal with these particular power imbalances. And this just, it's maddening to them, right? They really find this really offensive and also existential problem because it is righting some wrongs.
It's very similar to the way that people in the South reacted to the freeing of the slaves. Not well,
Yeah. And okay, so perhaps the people that are most in the crosshairs of the fundamentalists are the LGBTQ plus community, right? Mm-hmm. There's a particularly visceral history of oppression against non-normative expressions of sexuality and identity, right? And maybe I'm begging the question here, but why is that? Like, can you guys just kind of focus in a little bit?
I mean, it just challenges the status quo, essentially. I mean, at least in a lot of these people's minds, they have this, husband and wife, Adam and Eve sort of mentality. And anything that challenges that challenges their entire biblical worldview. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to question anything that their clergy or their parents indoctrinated them with. They want to think that it's all great and perfect and that they're going to heaven and all that jazz, So anything that challenges that sense of heteronormalcy is upsetting to them, and that upset turns to rage, or it's repressed homosexuality or what have you from those types of people. I find that to be very often the case.
Right. Yeah, and of course it's the Judeo-Christian status quo we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, and Muslim and a lot of other religions are very anti-gay. But so just talking about Christianity, though, we know that, there's Romans 1, and there's maybe a couple other passages in the Bible that condemn homosexuality, but still, that's not even really the bulk of it, because the Bible condemns eating shellfish or mixing milk and meat, but you don't have entire political parties railing against anyone eating oysters or beef stew or something with milk in it, right? So it can't just be scripture. The answer to every question about religious abuse and hypocrisy goes back to the same thing I've been harping on this whole episode. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but heteronormative family relationships are vehicles for the expression of male dominance over women and children. And
absolutely.
On the surface, we can observe that religions have always been concerned with fertility, right? As a method of extending their power into the next generation, raising up the next generation of believers, which also explains the strong emphasis on religious education and opposition to public schools. And the lack of fertility is an obvious reason for religions to oppose LGBT lifestyles, but it goes a lot deeper than that to what I mentioned earlier about the household hierarchy. LGBT people, of course, have their own families, and they can have children with surrogates, they can adopt, but they aren't generally following the hierarchical pattern. And that's incredibly threatening to those who do. And
that's what you're saying, Drew.
Yeah. And what you said, Drew, also is definitely the case that there are a lot of closeted gay men living as heterosexuals, and they just their dominance is how they deal with their rage and their repression.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Sean. I don't think it's about scripture, because honestly, if you look, it's not just the Sermon on the Mount, right, that talks about compassion and helping the poor. It means literally hundreds of passages in the Bible that talk about serving the poor, right? And it's completely ignored. Right? Ignored. It's like, no, we don't want to do that, right? We need to make them suffer this so they work for low wages so we can control the labor market or be our servants or whatever. It's so there's more. It's more complexity. There's more nuance to it in terms of it, for sure.
Well, and of course, the Bible, the notion of original sin and Eve and all of that, it just, there's so much hatred for women in the Bible. And if, Christians already hate the idea of birth control and abortion. And this is because it disconnects the sexual act from conception, which they believe to even be a sin among heterosexuals, right? So gay relationships, which aren't going to result in conception at all, are just 100% non-procreative sex. In the Christian view, 100% sin, right? The entire purpose of that relationship is for love, pleasure, and personal fulfillment. Has nothing to do with God, right? So we can't have that.
Right. Now, here's a thorny question. Moving on a little bit. Are there any differences between Christians and Islamic fundamentalists? Is it primarily one of intersectionality of power and privilege? I mean, what I think of is Christianity is a religion of the colonizers, right? Dominate the world, where Islam is a colonized religion in a sense. What do you think about that? Does this play out, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, Islam is a much younger religion, right? So I think it's more in its infancy than some of these other ones. So its place in the world is a little different, I think. But some of their at their core, I think we were outlining some of their attitudes about women are very similar. Some of their attitudes about homosexuals are very similar. So there's definitely crossover there. But as far as like their role in the world right now, as it stands, it's difficult to quantify. They've each one has done damage throughout history, whether you're looking at the Crusades or 9/11 or whatever, right? So it just depends on what point in time we're talking about. Right now, I think they hold different places in the world and in terms of their impact negatively right now.
We also have to look at the fact that the region that is now the Islamic world was very dominant in knowledge and art and mathematics and culture for a pretty substantial period in history. And that was when Europe was suffering through the Dark Ages. Islam was founded in the early 7th century. And I'm not an expert in the history of Islam, but a lot of it had to do at that time with the political situation. It was a very practical thing, defining Islam in opposition to Christianity and Judaism and controlling political rivalries. I mean, I was reading that some of the holy months in Islam were established to allow safe passage because there was so much violence. And so we have to remember also that for most of history, church and state were one and the same. And so any of the historic Muslim caliphates wouldn't have been that different from, say, the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I also know that radical Islam is a much more modern creation, which
it is.
Dovetails with what you were saying, Joe, about fundamentalism being reactionary. And the Quran itself is very much like the Old Testament of the Bible, concerning itself with spelling out religious law. And of course, various regimes in that part of the world had a wide range between strict theocracies and more tolerant visions of Islamic law. But radical Islam dates to the early 20th century and the writings of an Egyptian cleric, Sayyid Qutb, considered the father of Salafist jihadism. And he was a contradiction in many areas. On the one hand, he worked to improve secular education among Muslims, but he also believed that the Quran mandated that men were the managers of women's affairs. And this is really interesting. Also, he went to school in the U.S. for a couple of years, beginning in 1948, at what is now the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado, right? The father of Salafist jihadism, right? He also studied at Wilson's Teachers College in Washington, D.C. and at Stanford University.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
This guy, though, he apparently, in his American experience, he was really offended. He railed against American permissiveness, and he hated the westernization of Muslim culture, particularly the Western emphasis on individualism and, by extension, the rights of women. He referred to the, quote, mixing of the genders in America as animal-like. What does that remind you of? These racists, right? Except for he was just a fucking sexist. He saw Americans as, quote, numb to faith in religion, faith in art, and faith in spiritual values all together. So we can see where he got his religious fundamentalism from. It was literally from America. He hated Marxism, and he was staunchly anti-Semitic. Surprise, surprise. So this guy was thrown in jail in 1954 for a plot to assassinate Egyptian President Abdel Nasser.
Right.
He wrote his anti-secular and anti-Western manifestos from prison, in which he exhorted Muslims to use their religion to implement what he considered social justice, which consisted of opposing Western and specifically American decadence. Qutb was in and out of jail for more than a decade and was finally executed in 1966 by hanging. His execution has turned him into a martyr for modern jihad. And I know there's a whole lot more to explore about this, and I'll probably get dragged for oversimplifying the teachings of Islam, but I don't need to study the theology of the Quran to understand that fundamentalist Islam and fundamentalist Christianity are absolutely fruits from the same bad tree. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, that's the tree of religious hierarchy and dominance, especially of women.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, if you look at the two of the biggest countries, Islamic countries like Egypt and Turkey, they were much more secular a few generations ago than they are now. They've gotten much more extremist. That's been the modern trend. This fundamentalism has really taken over, right? A lot of these countries.
Well, Ataturk was a radical secularist, and he completely de-Islamified Turkey, and Turkey was on the verge of joining NATO up until Erdogan got into power.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm reminded of this.
Go ahead.
There used to be, I don't know if it's still around, but there was this Facebook page called My Stealthy Freedom, I think it was. And it was these women in countries like Iran and so forth, just taking discreet selfies of themselves without their face coverings and sharing them on social media. And I just thought that was some of the ballsiest, like bravest shit, like just the willingness to break those norms. I think, seeing stuff like that gives me a little bit of hope in the world that people are seeing that placing these kinds of barriers on people based out of tradition and religious thinking is toxic and poisonous and not awesome.
Not awesome at all.
And then so when we see what happened in Afghanistan, right, where, like you said, Sean, 20 years, at least women got a reprieve, girls got a reprieve for a little while. And some of these young women and girls don't know any different. They don't know the brutality. I mean, it's still conservative there, right? And it's not, it's still Islamic. It is still sexism and so forth, but not to the level of what you saw under the Taliban. That is a whole different ball of wax. And now we have to. That brings to mind all of the women all over the world that are experiencing this, not just in Afghanistan, but that's particularly bad.
There's about 500 million women who are suffering under various forms of religious rule.
Yeah.
It's something that liberals are terrible about this. Liberals are justified by saying, oh, that's their culture. We can't tell them how to live, blah, blah, blah.
Yep. This is the thing I touched on last week. Absolutely. Yeah. Liberal women will defend a burqa. It's
horrifying.
Mind-boggling. Yeah.
Well, last topic I want to talk about, because we're running kind of long here, but it's an important one. We need to consider the political strategy specifically about this fundamentalist movement, the innovative ways to address the religious concerns of common people that they use. They create institutes, magazines, network right from the beginning. This was the strategy set up by that meeting in the 19-teens that I was talking about earlier, building a network of day schools, colleges, seminaries, missionary agency. More important, the movement then later established a print and telecast industry after World War II. It created a system of parachurch organizations to meet the spiritual need of various groups. Youth groups, they really targeted unmarried people, veterans, and so on and so forth, right? This was very systematic. And public schools have been one of their biggest targets, as you mentioned earlier, Sean. In the early 20th century, they challenged the curricula by presenting anti-evolution bills. The famous one, of course, is the monkey trial, which pitted the fundamentalist politicians Williams Jennings Bryan against the agnostic lawyer Clarence Darrow. And we've seen the performance of that many times, right? Bryan won, but Darrow really got the moral victory there in many ways. But then in our times, it's not just challenging the curriculum; they're literally just eliminating public schools altogether. How can the left position itself in a way to fight these strategies? What can we do?
I mean, I would say normalize secularism. You know, we don't have to be the dominant voice in the party, but I feel like these kinds of discussions and awareness of these points of view are only going to advance these ideas further, just generally speaking, in the lexicon of cultural ideas.
Yeah.
The internet has been good for secularism. Let's put it that way. I mean, we have gone way up. And as a matter of fact, the nuns, the people who believe in no religion and don't go to church, is now as big as any of the Christian denominations. It's about equal to Catholics or Protestants in the United States. It's 20-something%. So if we could organize, we have a big voting bloc to vote for secular values. And I think we actually haven't done enough in that department. And maybe we, as we go forward with the radical secular, maybe we can become part of that to help organize this group, because it's truly like herding cats. And I just want to say also, there's really no easy answers to the problem of fundamentalist opposition to secular education, because they've turned this into a zero-sum game. And it might as well be the Scopes monkey trial, because, and we could do a whole series about this, but, religious conservatives who are dead set on preserving their moral hierarchy are also dead set on destroying public education. And they have made this death by 1,000 cuts. And
yes,
they really would like to establish an alternate reality, a complete alternative universe where science has no say and kids are fully indoctrinated with a religious worldview. And of course, now when they graduate, they can go to private school, they can go to Bible college, and then they can watch Fox News, right? They're just lifetime Republican voters, lifetime people who live in another universe. And
that was the plan.
It was the plan. It's been the plan the whole time, the Seven Mountains strategy, to take over all 7 aspects of society, including culture. And I don't have them in front of me, but there's a list of 7 things: business, culture, education, government, et cetera. And this whole thing began with the evolution controversy, as you mentioned, but the real impetus for the destruction of public schools began after Brown versus Board of Education decision mandated school integration. That just amped it up to 11.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, it's very true.
It was an insult to their moral hierarchy that conservatives have never gotten over. And we remember that Virginia actually closed its entire school system for nearly 2 years rather than submit to integration. It's been a bitter fight ever since. And even in its inception, the funding of public schools through local property taxes created a highly unequal system. Desegregation attempted to correct that, but the monkey wrenching of the public school system by religious conservatives has gone far beyond it. They've attacked textbooks. They've gotten elected school boards. They've set up private school networks. They've rabidly opposed teachers' unions. They've been responsible for the charter school movement, used to get vouchers and defund public schools, funneling public money toward private religious schools. They've set up an extensive homeschooling network, which, I mean, there was a whole show about that on Straight White American Jesus. And now they're taking aim at the teaching of American history. This is their latest gambit to oppose critical race theory, and also against any kind of multicultural studies. So conservative opposition, honestly, to equal, truthful, secular schools has reached the point where they've put so much money and so many resources toward this. I don't know how possible this is to repair the damage so long as the Republican Party remains in power. It just seems like it's too far gone.
Well, it does. I remember when I was living in Pennsylvania, I had considered for various reasons of putting my son in a private school or doing some alternative thing, and there was no secular option where I was, none, zero. So we didn't. We kept him in the public school. It was a very bad school. That's why we wanted to do that. But in a lot of places in the country, I mean, we Easterners here, in Massachusetts, that wouldn't be the case, but in a lot of places, yeah.
Well, and this is the vicious cycle, right? Because once you get the public schools into a death spiral where even liberal parents are pulling their kids out, what hope is there?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it is really at the heart of, controlling people, right? education, all of these different sectors of life, right? The seven, I can't remember what they all are either, but it's comprehensive, right? That was the strategy, and it was not incidental. It was very purposeful. Yeah.
Well, they're in their end game now.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot tonight. I hope it's been good. I think it's been good. Any final thoughts?
I've been listening a lot to a folk singer named Frank Turner, and he's got a song called Glory Hallelujah, and it's all about secularism. And there was a section of it that I thought was in keeping with the themes of the topics of today. It's quote, "I know you're scared of dying, man, and I am too, but just pretending it's not happening isn't going to see us through. If we accept that there's an end game and that we haven't got much time, then in the here and now, we can try to do things right. We'd be our own Salvation Army, and together we'd believe in all the wondrous things that mere mortals can achieve." End quote.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nailed it. You nailed
it.
And so that's our show for today. Remember, if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, support us on Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Monday at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Joe Kipinti. Thank you for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
The Radical Secular podcast is written and produced by Christoph Defoe, Sean Prophet, Joe Okipinti, and Drew Scott. Artwork and design by Tim Stetner. Post-production and theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Skye Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.